Irna grew up as a sweet and sensitive child. As time passed, she grew into a beautiful young lady ready for marriage. Someone's white, delicate fingers clutched the letters tightly and then hit the wooden table with a loud thud. She was a petite girl who kept repeating the same words. She could not believe that her life would turn out this way. The hem of the exquisite dress with a floral pattern was scattered by the girl's quick steps. She hurried to the window and opened it sharply, letting the fragrant smell of flowers and the morning coolness into the room. Her sky-blue eyes were filled with crystal tears, and her face was pierced with sadness and sorrow. This girl was Erna Hardy, and she stared for a long time at the magical landscape that opened before her eyes. A fragile two-story house hiding among the woods and flowering meadows was a perfect refuge for a tired soul. At this time, the flowering season of trees, bushes, and flowers growing in the area was beginning. Therefore, many flavors were constantly mixing and floating in the air. A wooden fence was awkwardly scattered around the territory, behind which chickens and roosters grazed. Erna's attention was drawn to the majestic oak tree, which was fascinating in its size and beauty, and the wooden chair underneath it for resting. She thought that the world does not care about the misfortune of one person. Even if you lose loved ones and risk losing your home, spring will remain as beautiful as ever. The flowers will continue to smell and stupefy people with their aromas, and the sun will continue to shine on their petals. Erna kept looking at the wooden chair under the oak tree, remembering her grandfather. Could she be complaining in vain? My grandfather always said that the world will remain beautiful regardless of people's actions. Maybe everything is for the best, but now the reality is too cruel. She must protect their home and grandmother in any way possible. Erna's thoughts were interrupted by someone's loud footsteps, a servant named Greby calling her. Greby reminded the young lady that it was almost time for lunch and she should come down as soon as possible. The girl replied that she was already on her way down. Neat, lace-up leather shoes with pointed toes thumped on the floor. The girl went to the mirror to assess her appearance, and she exhaled loudly when she saw her reflection. After that, she slapped her thin fingers on both cheeks, trying to bring herself back to life. Everything would be fine. She could handle it. There is always a way out. She hid the letters in a wooden chest of drawers, away from prying eyes. It was better if no one found it. After that, she walked confidently toward the dining room, her throat lifting her chin and her plump lips pursed. Today was a very bright and sunny day, more like summer than spring. Erna's grandmother had already settled at the head of the dining room table, holding a cup of tea delicately and asking the girl if she had spoken to a lawyer. While the maids were putting out the bread, the girl hesitated for a moment before answering. With a smile, Erna assured her grandmother that she had not met with a lawyer and planned to fix it soon. Erna's grandmother is a dainty woman with a straight posture, and she exhaled quietly and asked the girl to try. There must be a way out. The girl could not bear to lie. Of course, she was dating a lawyer. Their house had belonged to Baron Baden, who had died a month ago. The law of succession stated that only a male could inherit the house. The Baden family had only one heir, namely the Baron's nephew, Thomas Baden. He would get the house, although Erna tried to persuade the lawyer to find a way out, and he could not comfort her. The only thing the lawyer advised the young lady was to meet with the heir, Thomas Baden. He wiped his glasses with a handkerchief and said that Thomas was the only one who could help her. Then she kept her eyes on her husband, trying to think about every word he said so that it would make sense. Erna clutched her umbrella tightly, begging this man to have mercy on her and her grandmother. How indecent! But there was no other way out. If they lost their house, my grandmother would have no place to live. They would be left homeless. That same evening, she lit a candle and wrote a letter to Thomas, asking him to show mercy. A few days ago, she received a response to her request. The girl clutched her teacup tightly. Erna raised her blue eyes again and looked at her grandmother. The woman looked very tired. She became very weak lately, although she didn't show it. She was affected by the loss of her grandfather, who left them too soon, and now they want to give their house to some unknown man, throwing them out on the street. Erna thought that it was very difficult for her grandmother, and that she should never see that letter. The girl carefully got up and said that she would clean up all the dishes herself, and the woman looked at her granddaughter with interest. Instead, Erna kissed her grandmother, reminding her that Greby was busy with the Madeleine dessert and asked her to enjoy her lunch. The girl slowly rubbed the dishes until they began to shine crystal clear, reflecting the sun's rays. While Greby was busy with her business, she continued to think about the fact that the house would soon be owned by Thomas Bodden. In turn, Thomas said he would sell the house and land without hesitation. If he had simply refused to help, it would have been better, and she would not have felt guilty. But Thomas put her in front of a cruel choice. Bodden said he had no intention of delaying the sale of the house, but if Miss Hardy agreed to marry him, he would be very generous. The girl felt desperate. The next second, Erna angrily slammed her plate on the table, and the servants looked at the furious lady in horror. Instead, she smiled gently and said that she had finished the dishes and wanted to rest alone. She was sitting under that big oak tree, in the wooden chair that her grandfather loved, and she was sobbing. She forced herself not to cry. This man was not worth a single tear. She had to hold on. The sunlight danced on her serene face through the leaves of the tree. She is cornered, despite the fact that she has a father. The next moment, Ms. Hardy opened her eyes wide and looked up at the sky. Indeed, she still had a father. The girl quickly straightened her back, considering the effectiveness of this plan. Perhaps all was not lost. Erna opened her mouth in excitement and realization that there is always a way to fix things. The girl threw off her white apron and rushed into the house, the wind blowing her long snow-white braid. At this time, far from those places, the sun was just as generous in its sunshine on a large mansion with a perfectly paved courtyard. The mansion stood by a large river, with the sound of oars and water splashing all around. Handsome young men with strong physiques kept count and rode in synchronization, creating noise around them. This noise and the endless loud counting disturbed some of the people sleeping in this golden mansion with a large courtyard. The young man kept rolling over from side to side, trying to get comfortable and continue his sleep. No matter how much he closed his ears, the noise would not let him rest. He shouted angrily that he was awake. The man was still rubbing the back of his head sleepily, thinking that these energetic fools were probably reacting to the arrival of spring. This man was a bright blonde with an angelic face, and he believed that in spring everything really gets too loud. The man slowly got up and went to the window to pull back the curtains. Now an amazing view stretched before his eyes. He watched the men in the boats with noticeable fatigue, saying to himself that it was all because of the damn training. Men from noble families who want to do something worthwhile sit in these damned cramped boats. They'd be better off paying attention to girls if they have so much extra energy. He turned away from the window indifferently, losing all interest in the sight, and rang a small bell to let them know he was awake. Then he threw over his broad, massive shoulders the same white and gold clothes as the painting of the mansion where he was staying. Very quickly, a servant came to him, answering the bell and asking what His Highness wanted. The man smiled sarcastically as he finished the contents of the glass bowl and pointed at the men in the boats. The clerk lowered his head and apologized, saying that after the permission of the Schwerin City Hall, they could do nothing with them. The man smiled as he clutched the bowl. This year, there were even more participants, so the noise also increased. In any case, he knew that Leonid de Nestor would win. What fools the other participants were. The servant asked if he should move his belongings to another room and offered him breakfast. The man said that he had enough fruit and that it should be brought to the balcony. Afterwards, he went to the bathroom, where he soaked for a long time and was in thought. Wet hair clung to his calm face and closed eyelids. He lay motionless, like a living sculpture of a god of the highest pantheon. The wet eyelids slowly opened, showing the world the crystal of his cold, indifferent eyes. The man was sitting on the balcony in his bathrobe and slippers, getting used to the bright sunlight. He looked into the distance at the river where men in boats had recently sailed, and even further beyond, where dense forests had grown. The man slammed his empty glass with the remnants of ice on the table. His thoughts were constantly preoccupied with something. He liked to sit there in complete silence, immersed in his thoughts. The next moment, the man heard the servant's voice from behind him again and lazily turned around. The elderly man bowed elegantly again, informing His Highness that the Crown Prince had come to see him. The man nodded languidly, then took a piece of a juicy apple and put it to his mouth. Soon after, I heard the sound of expensive leather shoes and the sound of rapidly approaching footsteps. The face of Leonid Dneister, the Crown Prince of Rakan, appeared in the doorway. He wore the same blonde hair and exquisite glasses that made him look serious. A man in a bathrobe put his hand over his heart and slightly bowed his head in greeting His Highness. He was amused by the fact that His Highness was in such a hurry to go up to his chambers that he even forgot to change his sportswear. He slyly asked what the reason for such a hasty visit was, and the man with the glasses just exhaled angrily. Instead, the crown prince wanted the man across from him to speak. He showed with his whole body that he was still interested in something. After that, Leonid defiantly threw a magazine at the table with fruit where the man was sitting. The first cover featured a photo of a man in a chic tuxedo, with the caption, "Crowned Poisonous Mushroom" below. The man glanced at the magazine sneakily as he took a bite of an apple, and then repeated the title again. Leonid sat down in the chair opposite him and said incredulously that the man already knew his new nickname. Instead, the man continued to feign surprise at being called a poisonous mushroom. He looked at the cover again as he continued with his breakfast, and then said that it was very good that the editors had chosen such a good photo. "It's already better." Leonid was silent for a while, carefully studying his interlocutor, and then said that Gladys was returning to Risen. He sat silently, waiting for the man to give at least some kind of response to this information. The man's face didn't change at all. He looked into the distance and continued chewing on his apple. The silence was broken again by Leonid, who wanted to know what Bjorn was going to do now. Bjorn silently reached for another piece of apple and then said that he did not have an answer to this question himself. Gladys Hartford, or as the first cover of another magazine says, is an unlucky princess. Once upon a time, the whole of Retton was in love with the beautiful Princess Larsa. The rumors were true. She was going to return even after breaking up with Crown Prince Bjorn and losing her child. Now all attention will be paid to the unfortunate princess and the former crown prince nicknamed Poison Mushroom. Everyone is wondering if they will get back together. The man continued to stare into the distance, noticing that many aristocrats would like such rumors. He was enjoying the sunny weather. Bjorn said that this weather was favorable for the rapid growth of poisonous mushrooms, which made Leonid angry. The train was rapidly approaching its platform, and the loud sounds of its arrival could be heard for kilometers into the distance. People passing by would involuntarily glance at the sign with the number 5 and the inscription Schwerin. A girl in a long dress with floral patterns and a long braid stood silently facing the train. Suddenly, a man in uniform approached her and loudly asked if she would get on the train, and she quickly shook her head in agreement. This girl was Erna Hardy, who exhaled loudly as soon as the annoying man left her alone. Erna's face was again filled with sadness, and she was unable to say goodbye to her grandmother as a young lady should. She must have found the hidden letter by now. She couldn't tell her. Her grandmother would rather go bankrupt than ask her son-in-law, whom she doesn't even want to know, for help.
Erna bit her lip hard, thinking about it. She would definitely talk to her grandmother when she returned.
She will have to meet her father for the first time since her mother's funeral. 11 long years have passed since then. The girl clutched her suitcase tightly. She and her father were not as close as they should be. She didn't even know if he would let her over the threshold. But at a certain point, he is her only hope. She may not have any other option. She continued to stare at the train motionless. Would she be able to cope with this task? The man in uniform shouted again that she should either get on the train or leave immediately. The girl stood up on the stairs with determination. She will definitely succeed. She will make it. The time had come to take fate into her own hands, and Erna proudly raised her head, her exquisite outfit shining in the sun. If the world doesn't care about the fate of one person, then he or she will take matters into his or her own hands. Even if she has to cling to the last sparks of hope every day, then so be it. Sitting on the train, she was trembling incessantly, afraid that her father would simply throw her out, slamming the door in her face. It was quiet in the royal mansion at that time, and if someone from the outside looked at the place, it would seem that the people inside were not worried about anything, but this was not the case. Tea shimmered with different honey shades in a gilded cup, and the cup rang at the slightest touch of the table. Opposite this cup, on a green sofa, Prince Bjorn sat calmly. His face was so impassive that it seemed as if he was about to fall asleep. A young girl in a brightly colored outfit and high hairstyle kept shouting something in his direction, attracting his attention. But he did not show any interest in this conversation, and the girl was annoyed that even at such moments the man looked stunning. Bjorn replied that he was sleepy, and it was not surprising that he returned just before dawn. The girl was boiling with rage. She wanted an answer to her question immediately. On the table was a newspaper describing the reunion of the crowns of the prince and the unlucky princess. The girl wanted to know if it was true, but all her efforts were meaningless and in vain, and her husband continued to sit silently in one place. His beautiful face did not reveal any emotions, and it seemed that only God himself could guess his intentions and thoughts. The girl continued to boil with rage. Her face took on angry features that distorted it. She stood up and shouted Bjorn's name loudly, hoping that her loud cries would bring him to his senses. Bjorn slowly opened his eyes and turned in her direction, assessing the girl with a cold look. He indifferently concluded that she was amazing after all. To have come to Schwerin from the capital in such a short time, and with a full parade. Tiredly, he reached out toward the damned newspaper that gave him so many headaches. Picking it up, Bjorn began to look at the provocative headlines and read the description. He read out loud that it was not entirely wise of Gladys to forgive her husband for such egregious behavior, and that the princess was known for her generosity. There is every reason to believe that this summer, the secular community of Resen is expecting a hot and busy season. After reading the article, Bjorn looked down and emotionlessly threw the crumpled newspaper on the table. The man reached for a cup of tea again, and it seemed to the newspapermen that his relationship with Gladys was unusual and covered in intrigue. But aren't the newspapermen themselves the main intriguers of the season? Bjorn silently raised his cup to his lips. The girl, meanwhile, did not think of shutting up. She continued to destroy the silence in the room. She needed an explanation, and again, complete silence in response. The girl said that under such circumstances, their relationship came to an end. Bjorn looked up at the young lady with interest, not looking up from his drink. Meanwhile, the girl said that there was no point in their relationship and that she would announce her engagement by the end of spring. After finishing her monologue, she sat down on the couch, folding her arms and waiting for her husband's response, who had meanwhile taken a drink from his cup. Bjorn's thoughts were occupied with clear calculations and evaluation of the girl. She was moderately vulgar and moderately elegant for him. In addition, he was comfortable in this relationship because he could always return to her. Still, this was possible until gossip about him spread everywhere. The girl couldn't understand why he was looking at her like that. While Bjorn had already made his decision, he exhaled with a whistle before he started to speak. After that, the man calmly congratulated the girl on her upcoming engagement, addressing her by her surname, Perez. Ms. Perez was not expecting this answer. She was dissatisfied, and Bjorn replied that it was her suggestion to leave. Bjorn was very good at memorizing and controlling other people's words, and he said that he had only accepted her own offer and was not to blame. Then the man looked at the girl with a victorious look and asked her what he was wrong about. Ms. Perez drilled her husband with an angry look. She realized that she had allowed herself to be trapped in a verbal trap. The girl tried to stop Bjorn, to press him pitifully, but he only felt tired. Bjorn looked at the young lady again, thinking that she was beginning to bore him. Meanwhile, the girl's face was already red with anger and hopelessness. She expected a different outcome from their conversation. The man bent down in a polite bow, showing his inclination, and said that he hopes that young Lady Perez will be a great match for a wealthy count. The girl turned pale, and if there was any language game between them, it ended in her unconditional loss. Bjorn got up and rubbed his head tiredly. It was cracking with severe pain, while a frail woman with glasses approached him. He turned to the woman in concern and called her Mrs. Fitz, a drop of sweat beginning to form on his face. He said that it was unlikely that the woman wanted to sing him a lullaby, even though he was tired. The woman said that unfortunately she had come with bad news. Bjorn must immediately pack up and head to the train station. The man asked why he had to be there, and the woman replied that Her Highness the Queen would be arriving soon. Bjorn rubbed his head wearily. He had forgotten that she was coming today. The Queen had been invited to a charity reception at the Royal Hospital. He was to become an escort for the Queen, so the woman emphasized that they should start getting ready. Meanwhile, Erna sat on the train, continuing her long journey to her father. She squeezed in between adults and children. There were so many people on the train that there was barely enough air. The girl kept looking out the window, looking at the scenery. Very soon they would arrive in Schwerin. There were so many people there, and everything seemed very bright. She had to put aside her panic. After all, she was born in this city and lived there until she was 5 years old. The train slowly stopped, and people started to get out. They arrived at the Schwerin terminus. The girl looked around the neighborhood in confusion. She should go out too. She would certainly find her way, but she kept clutching the suitcase in her hands, trying to regain her composure. "It's okay. Go." Ms. Erna's eyes drilled into the crowded train station, and she was very nervous. Even here, she was squeezed like a fish in a rusty tin can, unable to move or breathe in. She was trying to get through this crowd of people who were screaming and looking at each other incessantly. The young ladies were especially excited and wouldn't let her pass. Ms. Erna did not know where to go because she could not get out of the crowd, and she was getting farther away from the exit. The girls kept pushing and screaming that someone was approaching. A man. The girl was wondering who was causing the screaming. She tried to squeeze through to get out of the station and managed to do so. Very suddenly, she broke through, almost falling to the ground. She gasped and opened her eyes to see many soldiers lined up around her. A man in a perfect tuxedo and a big hat was slowly walking toward her. He was very handsome, perfect, and he had a long black cane in his hand. He was a blond man with a charming, albeit gloomy look in his cold eyes that resembled crystal.
Erna was numb for a moment, probably because of him. He definitely looked like a man who could lead a crowd and arouse curiosity.
For a moment, she thought that this amazing man smiled and looked at her, but only for a moment. She was shocked and could not take a single step away, continuing to watch him. She was brought to her senses by one of the soldiers, who pointed to the side and asked people to immediately step aside and let the man through. The people obeyed, and one by one began to stand upright on both sides, remaining motionless and bowing their heads. Erna also stepped aside and did what the others did, bowed her head and waited. The man in the tuxedo was Björn, and he continued to walk slowly forward. And again, for a small moment, he stopped in front of Erna, thinking that she stood out. He thought that her dress had too much lace and looked rather old-fashioned, and she could feel his eyes on her, blushing to the tips of her ears. Björn thought it came from another time. It looked quite interesting and beautiful. The man with glasses behind Erna was making fun of everyone who had gathered there, calling the man the laughingstock of the royal family. Erna was afraid that her husband might hear the gossip behind her, and he immediately turned around.
This look pierced both her and all the gossipers, silencing them all. One should definitely not make eye contact with someone like him.
But the very next moment, his eyes brightened and a piercing smile appeared on his lips. This sincere smile made everyone who saw it blush. She heard heavy sighs in the man's wake, and Erna said that he was elegance and sophistication itself. Even the man who had been throwing mud at him a minute ago couldn't resist that smile. It was already starting to get dark. The sun was sinking, and the streets were getting darker. Erna was wandering these dark streets, and she kept saying that she would not be able to find her home at this rate. She saw a large fountain in front of her that was mesmerizing in its beauty, and she decided to rest a bit at its bottom. She approached the crystal water, lifting the hem of her long dress slightly. The next minute, Erna sat down tiredly, her legs buzzing from the long walk. She breathed in the cool evening air and thought that everything had been so complicated from the beginning. With a small hand in white gloves, she rubbed the lace, examining her dress. Her grandmother dried this dress for her, and when she arrived in the city, she lost all her resolve. She has to follow etiquette and behave with dignity. Her grandmother taught her how a young lady should behave, to be restrained and elegant in all circumstances. Even though she bears the hardy name and her grandmother, the most elegant woman in Baden, raised her to be a decent girl, she will prove it. Behind her, the water hissed and splashed, and a powerful stream poured upward. Two men did something. One climbed a ladder and clapped his hands near the light that had come on. The other held a small lantern in his hands. She thought it was amazing. She had never seen anything like it before. This is what Schwerin was like, the city where she was born and spent her childhood. The city. With beautiful architecture and lots of people, the streets were decorated with ancient buildings and columns. Erna remembered that it was very late, and she should hurry if she didn't want to be late. She began to walk away from the magical fountain and the lighted night lights. We need to gather our strength and continue on our way. There is little time left. Meanwhile, the large ballroom was flooded with light, and many elegantly dressed people were milling about, looking for the most profitable interlocutor. A beautiful blonde woman in a flashy red outfit was addressing her brother in a disgruntled tone. She said that she did not understand him at all. The man she was addressing was Björn, who looked at his sister in silence without saying a word. She told him that Gladys was returning for a reason, and that he had to understand what it meant for him. Björn turned away from her and said from behind her back that it probably only meant that the summer season would be a failure. The blonde woman got angry and shouted that he didn't dare talk like that, especially about Gladys. About the same Gladys whose feelings he trampled on and threw into the trash like trash. The man stopped for a minute, remembering familiar facial features. The image of a beautiful girl in tears appeared before him. She said his name sobbing and begged him to stop saying those horrible things to her. Björn stood silently without saying a word. His silence was not just a principle of elegance. It was his defense. The girl continued to press. She added that it was not that Gladys was her friend. It would be nice if she forgave him. Björn coldly pierced every part of her body, then called her by her title, Duchess of Heine, just 2 words. A family name and a title, and in those 2 words, enough cold to freeze a continent. Björn said that the Duke had probably already searched her, so it would be good for her to return to her husband as soon as possible. Indeed, Duke Heine stood behind the girl's back and was afraid to approach his offended wife. Björn was tired of hearing the same complaints and dissatisfied words from different people. He heard someone calling him again and turned his head toward the open balcony. There were several men standing there, and one of them waved him over and called him over. This is not to say that Björn was pleased with this offer, but it was definitely better than the previous ones. There was another man on the balcony with his head bowed in despair. When Björn asked what happened to him, he was told that his investment had been burned by fraudsters. The man had invested in foreign bonds and was defrauded. The man thanked His Highness, reminding him that he was still afloat thanks to him. Björn remembered the day his friend tried to convince him to join this incomprehensible foreign adventure on short notice. He immediately realized that it was an idiotic idea. The guy said that he would have hit him that day if he had been a child of the royal family, and thanks to him, he didn't burn in that case. Peter was even able to make a lot of money by investing in a steel company, following Björn's advice. To this, the man replied that he had reached such heights only because of his talent for begging. Peter continued to talk about how Björn was very talented with money, and wasn't it too much to have everything at once? The unfortunate man next to them asked them to shut up, calling the men callous. The man raised his face and asked Björn to punish the fraudsters, because he was not the only one who fell into this trap. He added that Viscount Hardy had lost almost everything because of them. Peter added that he didn't have long to live, and Björn rolled the name on his tongue. Another idiot was found and fell into the trap of sweet promises of foreign fraudsters. His eyes were drawn to the snow-white flowers under the balcony, their glow especially beautiful in the moonlight. They were lilies of the valley, and Björn kept looking at them, as if they reminded him of something. They were definitely in Gladys's wedding bouquet, and since then, these flowers have gained popularity, which is probably when they were planted here. His thoughts did not stop there. He remembered something else that caught his attention today. He remembered a girl at the train station in an old-fashioned lacy dress. Her fragile hat was also decorated with beautiful lilies of the valley. He thought that even though her image was a bit old-fashioned, it was still consistent. Meanwhile, Erna kept her eyes on the map and looked up when she realized that she had finally reached her destination. She stood on the threshold of an exquisite mansion decorated with gilding. She could find him. It's okay, because this is her father's house. She tried to push her fear and anxiety away. Its handle easily reached for the doorbell. There was no turning back now. A woman with a high hairstyle was asking her husband what he was going to do with this annoying child. Erna Hardy. The man was silent for a long time, pursing his lips. Really, what should he do? Last night, the servants were making a fuss about his daughter arriving at the owner's house, to which he replied that it was nonsense and wanted to see the swindler. Erna stood behind the very maid who had announced her arrival, her eyes down to the floor. When she saw her husband angry, she called him father in her small voice. The man froze in his tracks. He recognized the girl as soon as he saw her, and his wife almost fainted from shock. Standing on the doorstep, Erna begged her father to keep the Baden estate for them. The wife was on her husband's heels, screaming about what he was going to do. The husband replied that he would send her home immediately. The woman was screaming that the girl had come in the middle of the night and was making demands at a time when they were on the verge of bankruptcy. If they helped her, they would go bankrupt tomorrow. The woman called the girl a beggar, begging for money, although she had not heard from her in years. The man asked the woman to calm down, assuring her that he would send her back. In conclusion, his wife only added that these Badens had no shame or conscience, and meanwhile Erna's father loudly called out to the girl. At that time, the young lady was standing with her back to them, looking at the paintings in the hall, and immediately turned around at her father's shout. She smiled elegantly at him and greeted him discreetly. In her new outfit, Erna looked even more delicate and feminine. The man looked at his daughter in silence, and even his wife did not understand what was happening to him. From the outside, it seemed as if he was not just admiring his daughter's beauty, but was thinking about something in detail. Erna was naturally endowed with a beautiful appearance and aristocratic features, and she took after her mother. Her husband thought that if she was dressed up a bit, she would become a real beauty. The man thought that Erna's beauty could be compared even to the beloved Princess Gladys, and that she would be no match for her. This appearance could win more than one game if you play your moves correctly. He smiled at his daughter and asked her to forget about the formality and come with them to the table for breakfast. His wife was speechless at what she saw. He turned to his wife and gently asked her to be quiet, hinting that they had something important to discuss, on which the fate of the Hardy family depended. The wife was seething with anger and dislike for the girl. She did not understand what her husband wanted to do and kept silent. A carriage arrived at the royal estate, and Crown Prince Bjorn stepped out, attracting attention as always. He slowly walked up to Ms. Fritz, who was already on her way to meet him, and politely greeted her. The woman replied, without concealing her sarcasm, that the prince had arrived earlier than they expected, and the man smiled at these words. When the man had almost reached the door, the woman reported that he had received a letter from the palace. Bjorn asked what they wanted from him again. There are only a few reasons why letters can come from the palace. Miss Fritz replied that His Highness had ordered the prince to attend the celebration in honor of the founding of the kingdom, and that if he did not show up, all responsibility would fall on his servants. Bjorn carefully asked the woman if she didn't think the proposal sounded more like an order and a threat. The woman just shrugged her shoulders, showing that she was sorry that he thought so. Bjorn was not at all upset by this turn of events, and he calmly opened the violinist and the door, entering the room. Every year in May, the day of the founding of the Renaissance is celebrated and the opening ball held in the royal court. This is a big holiday that attracts the attention of the entire aristocratic community, some of whom prepare for this holiday all year round. After Bjorn abdicated, he never appeared at the ball, and it seems that the royal family will no longer turn a blind eye to this. The queen probably made up her mind at that charity event. His mother was very interested in whether there was a girl in the world who stirred his heart, and he refused her in a rather mild way. But it seems that the queen is very worried about this. Her worries began a long time ago, and now they have reached their epic. She used to worry a lot about Princess Gladys and their failed relationship. Bjorn took off his shirt, thinking that he was tired of this situation. He fell on his bed with his hands over his eyes, the light coming through the curtains blinding him and preventing him from resting properly. Meanwhile, Erna was at her father's house. 3 days had passed since her arrival in Schwerin, and her father had not yet given her any answers. He kept saying that he needed to think about it and that she felt very uncomfortable, and that if this continued, she should return to Burford. The girl's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a young maid who had met her at the doorstep earlier and brought her afternoon tea. Erna addressed the maidservant in a friendly manner, but the girl asked the lady not to address her with such formality. The young girl in the apron was called Lisa, and she shyly addressed the maid by her first name. The girl seemed to like this treatment, as did Lady Erna herself. Erna was surprised by the kindness and warmth with which Lisa addressed her. It seemed to be the first time since Paul. Baden is a very remote area, and there were few children her age, and it was there that she met a boy named Pavlo. Unfortunately, Pavel entered the University of Arts and left Baden, and they haven't seen each other since. But the girl remembered that the academy was located in Schwerin. After thinking it over a bit, the girl turned to Lisa with a small request. She asked how far the art academy was from here. Lisa was happy to report that she was about 5 stops away by stagecoach and asked if the lady would like to leave. Erna would like to, but it would be rude to just leave. Her memories consumed her, and she wanted to become the man Pavlo grew up to be. She wanted to see him. After all, he was her only friend in childhood, and even after the long separation, he remained in her memory. Her thoughts were interrupted again when Lisa called Miss Erna, informing her that her master was waiting for her. The girl was surprised and thought that perhaps her father had finally thought things through and she would get an answer. When she walked into the dining room, she saw him with his wife, and they looked overly friendly and happy. Her father called her his dear daughter, and she asked him awkwardly what he wanted to talk about. The man said that he wanted to apologize for never visiting his beloved daughter and not being able to see with his own eyes how she had grown into such a fragile lady. He called her an unhappy child and himself a terrible father, and given their first meeting after the separation, Erna was very surprised by this change in his attitude. The father put his hand over his heart, repeating that he had been thinking all these days about how to make amends, although it might be too late. His wife looked on with such interest as if she were watching some wonderful performance. The man proudly said that he had decided to give the estate to his beloved daughter. The girl cried out in surprise. She could not believe her ears. Her father wants to buy the estate from Thomas and give it to her. Isn't this a dream? The man continued to smile and asked Erna to calm down and listen to him, because he also had a request for her. He stretched out his hand to his daughter and asked her to stay here with him instead. Erna was surprised once again that day. She could not even imagine that her father would ask for such a thing. The man added that he wanted to live together as a real family for at least 1 year. He kept saying that his heart was bleeding because she would be living alone in such a remote place, because she hadn't even reached the age of marriage yet, and in Schwerin she would be able to make useful acquaintances. He owes it to her as a father to give her this opportunity, and his wife Brenda has also happily agreed to help her with everything. Brenda elegantly pointed at Erna and added that she was the daughter of an aristocrat, and it was her duty as a stepmother to raise her to be a true lady. Erna thought about it. A year with her father in Schwerin and entering the secular community, she had never even dreamed of such a thing. If she refused, would he buy the estate for her? The father seemed very sincere and friendly. She thought he might really want to help her. It will certainly not be easy, but it is only a year. It's not a bad offer. Erna replied that she agreed to such conditions. She would never lose the Baden estate. It was another sunny day in Schwerin. Spring was in full swing, and the streets were crowded with people. The 3 men were discussing the recent horse race, and Björn's horse had won as usual. One said that he had never seen his mare lose. Peter said that Björn is not really interested in racing or winning. Perhaps he should sell the mare. There will be a lot of people willing to buy her, and he wants to buy her himself. Björn confirmed that he was not really interested in this competition and would not sell the mare to anyone. When asked why not, he replied that she simply belonged to him alone. Peter said that she was not a woman to talk about her like that, and he called the prince a pervert. Peter loved to gossip, and he reported that a charming maid had recently taken a job at the Hardy household. Björn listened to this conversation with some interest. He had heard this name a lot lately. In their situation, it would be better to fire most of the servants. Where do they get the money from? Had this girl been in the house before? Peter replied that he had seen her enter the house with his own eyes. He assured me that she was definitely the maid. Björn asked how long Peter had been spying on Hardy's house, and the boy assured him that he had met the beautiful girl by chance in Tara Square. He wanted to get to know her, but she was scared of him, as if she were from some province. The boys began to quarrel with each other, saying that Peter was too rude, and that's why the girl was scared. The man said that if it were Björn, even a provincial girl would not run away. The prince was tired of their idle chatter. He said a modest goodbye to his friends and told them he had to go. He rolled the name Hardy around on his tongue. Björn has really been hearing this name too often lately, and they've started to arouse his curiosity. Meanwhile, at the Hardy house, the day began with new secrets and intrigue. The house was visited by one of the most famous people in Schwerin. She was an exquisite woman, dressed in gorgeous clothes. Brenda was constantly hovering around her, complimenting Erna and saying that she was more beautiful than anyone she had ever worked with before. Countess Victoria Mayer was not one to be fooled. Young ladies would line up in long lines to become her tutors, because Victoria would find a suitable match for each and every one of them. That is why she is more famous even than the queen herself. There is no one better known in the market of brides in Retsen than her. The countess was born into the family of a bankrupt baron and managed to obtain the title of count on her own, and then married her daughters off to suitors that others could not even dream of. Brenda was very nervous to bring this woman here. She used every possible and impossible connection to find out why this girl decided to go out now. If she didn't come back, the chance would be lost. Meanwhile, the countess continued to sit silently in her seat, showing no emotion. There was more elegance in her than in all of Schwerin. Brenda's calculations were simple. If they could sell Erna to some rich guy, their problems would be solved in a flash. She recalled a conversation with her husband Walter, who was all over the idea. He suggested selling his daughter at a bride market. Of course, she doubted the idea at first, but her husband didn't care. He had already decided that Erna would be their lucky ticket to a prosperous life. The man said that the girl was just a perfect commodity, and they were very lucky to have her in their hands. It was the only way to pay off all their debts and continue the Hardy family business. Brenda was shocked by the proposal, but rather only because she hadn't thought of it herself. It looked like they should have done so, as they had no other choice. Very soon the servants reported that Miss Erna had returned from her walk, and Brenda ordered them to call the girl immediately. Erna slowly entered the room where a woman she didn't know was sitting, her blue eyes respectfully and submissively looking at the audience. Today she was wearing a neat, snow-white outfit that resembled the magical flower lily of the valley. The Countess looked up curiously, assessing the tiny Lady Hardy. Brenda ordered the girl to greet the Countess, and Erna gently lifted the hem of her dress and gently bowed to the woman, greeting her respectfully. Brenda timidly asked the Countess if she liked the girl. The woman smiled sweetly, removing the beautiful fan from her face. She said that the woman's words were true, and Erna was indeed beautiful. Victoria Mayer contacted Erna and told her that she was glad to meet her and chose the girl as her foster child. The girl was holding a beautiful blue flower in her left hand, and with her other hand she was holding scissors, which she used to cut off the extra petals. It was Erna. She was looking at the flower sadly. Her face was filled with longing. She recalled a meeting with her grandmother and how they had a fight. Her grandmother told Ernie to immediately abandon the deal with her father. Erna reported that the lawyer had met with Thomas. He agreed to sell the estate to her father, and he promised to inherit it in a year. In her opinion, it was the only way out. But her grandmother looked down sadly. She knew her father well. The girl would have to sell herself for the estate. But Erna assured her that this was not the case, that she would keep the estate and live with her father for a while. At the time, she really thought it would be like that. The grandmother did not believe Walter, and she was sure that everything would end badly for her girl. She asked Erna to think again, because the estate was not worth it. Is this really what her young heart desires? The conversation ended badly. The grandmother became very ill and asked Erna to leave her alone. Someone was calling the girl, but she did not hear it. Her body shuddered with her grandmother's warnings and sadness for home. Lisa came up to her, offering her afternoon tea as usual, and the maid smiled sincerely at the girl. Erna agreed to have tea and asked Lisa to join her. The girl laid out a beautiful flowery set and began to carefully pour the drink. Lisa was delighted with the taste of this tea. She kept saying that Lord Earl Grey was a genius. The girl smiled and offered her some more. The maid was pleasantly surprised that the girl offered to drink tea together. Erna was a very kind girl, and now I understand what everyone was gossiping about. Specifically, they gossiped that Erna was not like other aristocrats, that she had no coldness or pride, that she was from the provinces. But she was incredibly beautiful, bright, and kind. Lisa's attention was drawn to the creative mess on the girl's desk, and she asked what was there. Erna held out the beautiful, artificial flower she had made in her hand. The maid couldn't help but praise her talented hands. Lisa thought that she was holding a real flower in her hand, a freshly picked bud. What else could it be but a real gift? Erna was very pleased to see how much Lisa admired her creation, and she smiled and said that it was a gift for her. The maid apologized, because she didn't mean it that way, but Erna persuaded her to accept the gift anyway. The girl replied that the flower would look good on a hat, or it could be attached as a brooch. Lisa promised to take care of and appreciate this gift. The next moment, the maid exploded and began to convince the girl to go out for a walk now. Lisa wanted to give Erna a tour of the city as a thank you for the gift, because she knew that she was not well versed in Schwerin. She ran to get her hat, and the two girls went for a walk around the city. First, they went to the Central Park. After enjoying the beauty of the seaport, it was endowed with a special atmosphere. Lisa wanted to show Erna the beautiful fountain, and the girl had already enjoyed it on the day she arrived. Then the girl pointed to a large antique house, calling it the most famous hotel in Schwerin. Lisa walked forward, talking about each building incessantly. She wanted to show the young lady the confectionery, and Erna turned around when she saw a familiar silhouette. The silhouette of a blond man in a perfect tuxedo, a large hat, and a black cane in his hands. She had seen him before, followed by a beautiful girl in a voluminous dress. Erna froze in place, looking at the familiar face, trying to remember where they had met. Then, her blue eyes shone. He was at the train station. The man who had attracted so much attention with his unexpected appearance. The next moment, Lisa brought her back to consciousness, shaking her incessantly and shouting that she shouldn't do it. This was not meant to be directed at the handsome man Erna was looking at. The maid turned in the other direction and pulled the girl with her, repeating that he was not suitable for a lady like her. This man is really a very bad and unsuitable person. Lisa's strong objections only piqued the girl's curiosity. She asked several times if the man was really that bad. The maid thought for a moment about how to explain who the man was, but only one phrase came to mind. Poison mushroom. Lisa warned Erna that she would die tragically if she ate this poisonous mushroom. She should remember these words. A beautiful wedding dress with bare shoulders and puffed sleeves took up half the room. It resembled a beautiful white lily in its elegance. Brenda was nervously fidgeting with her fingers, sweat dripping down her face, while Countess Victoria was calmly drinking tea behind her. Does the Countess really want Erna to make her debut in this dress? Brenda asked if she could dress the girl in something more modest, because her neckline and shoulders were so open that it was embarrassing. The Countess replied that it would be quite a sight if a girl in her 20s wore the same clothes as younger debutantes, and the choice was of course hers. Brenda was silently furious. The problem was not the look of the dress, but its price. They'd have to sell something to pay for such a luxury, but that wouldn't be a problem if they achieved their goal. The woman realized that the Countess was well versed in such matters, and if they needed to wear this dress, they would do so. The next moment, Brenda called her maid over. She caught Lisa by the chin and ordered her to do everything she could to get Erna to put on the dress. If she didn't, she would immediately fire the maid and throw her out into the street. Meanwhile, the night lights were already on at the prince's estate, and preparations were underway. Björn was putting on a new shirt and fastening his royal cufflinks, because a new grueling performance was about to begin. He picked up a classic black tie, which gave him an even more stern look, although it is certain that a man would not wear it, but would still be in the center of attention. But today, he still promised to look gorgeous, as his status and position in the aristocratic community demand. Miss Fitz looked at her pet with great pride. He was a perfect, refined man. The woman bowed her head in gratitude to Björn, and now the servants will not be punished, because he will fulfill the royal family's wish and appear at the ball. She reminded him that the party was about to start, so he should hurry up and get there on time. Björn joked that being late was not a bad idea. The only thing Björn wanted on this beautiful night was to have as many traffic jams as possible. Meanwhile, somewhere in the distance, under the glow of the full moon, a harnessed carriage carrying the Hardy family was traveling. Brenda picked on her husband. She blamed him for the accident. She cried out that if Walter hadn't lost their estate in the capital, there would be no problems now. Erna was sitting in the same carriage, and it was unbearable for her to listen to their constant quarrels and arguments. She was very nervous about the ball they were in such a hurry to attend, and she didn't want to go at all. Even more, she didn't want to just show up in front of people in this revealing outfit, so she pulled back her shawl to reveal her bare shoulders. The only reason she wore that dress was because of Lisa. She didn't want her maid to get in trouble because of her. Erna would like to be able to float in midair and just disappear, but the carriage has already stopped. Again and again, she told herself that there was no turning back, stepping onto a new level. When she got out of the carriage, she kept holding onto her shawl, covering her young body. As soon as they arrived, Countess Victoria approached them furiously, asking how they could be so late. There must be at least some limit to their unpredictability. Brenda timidly apologized, telling us about the terrible accident that had caught them on their way here, while Erna stood meekly in silence. The girl was shivering as the Countess asked why she was wearing a shawl. Brenda assured her that she could not convince the girl to take it off on the road. Victoria caught the girl by the hand and led her inside. She was boiling with defiance. The girl couldn't keep up with the woman and asked her to wait, but the Countess only got angrier, saying how much more time they needed to be late. Victoria jabbed a finger at Erna, reminding her that all the debutantes had already shown their worth. Even His Highness had already arrived. She was late. The Countess came to the door of the main entrance and politely asked the men to announce their arrival, albeit late. Someone loudly announced that Viscount Hardy and his family had arrived at the ball, and the hearts of the queue beat loudly with alarm. Countess Victoria proudly raised her head and looked sternly at her pupil. The door slammed open, not the kind of appearance for a girl who wants to go unnoticed. Erna managed to keep a calm expression on her face, even though the Countess behind her could see how obscenely she was trembling. Finally, the door swung open, revealing a bunch of elegantly dressed people, most of them looking at the newcomers with curiosities. The Countess pushed the girl and ordered her to go forward, and the woman caught her hand on a transparent shawl. Then she pulled it off the girl's shoulders in one elegant movement, showing everyone the beauty of her pet. Erna felt confused. She had never worn an outfit like this before, and yet she was incredibly beautiful. Her sophistication and beauty were evidenced by the hungry looks of the boys and men present, who were embarrassed to see her. In turn, The noblewomen also looked at the girl with interest and admiration. It seemed that she was the only one who received all the attention at that moment. Loud gossip was spreading through the ballroom that she was the daughter of Viscount Hardy. Why did the man hide such a beauty for so long? Everyone wanted to know the answer to this question. People discussed the fact that she lived in the province for so long because of her poor health. This is probably why she made her debut so late. Erna only just noticed that she was not wearing a shawl, and she was choking on her shame. She felt completely naked in the middle of a crowd of people. She could hear the gossip of the people around her. Her back burned from their stares, and Erna blushed red to the tips of her ears. Something in her chest was pinching hard. She tried her best but couldn't breathe in. The air was gone. The girl began to suffocate. The people behind her began to discuss that something was wrong, and everyone wondered why the girl had suddenly stopped. There were too many voices. Why was everyone looking at her? Erna wanted to run away, but she was frozen in place. She couldn't see the faces of these people. A black haze appeared before her eyes. It was unbearable. The next moment, a loud echo reverberated through the hall as His Highness Prince Bjorn arrived. Bjorn slowly entered the ballroom, but he too was lucky to be at least a little late. The man was walking forward along the path, and a beautiful girl stood before him motionless like a statue. Bertha was gnawing on her fan in fear. This fool was in the way of the prince. What to do? Meanwhile, the countess hid her curiosity and sly smile. Bjorn could not understand who this girl was, standing in his way and not giving way. The girl did not even want to move away. The next moment, something caught the man's attention, and he noticed that she was trembling. Erna began to faint in the middle of a ballroom full of people, in front of the eyes of the crown prince. The young people opened their mouths in horror and surprise, and the girl was about to fall to the ground. Someone's white-gloved hand moved forward cautiously, the long braids of the queue wrapped around someone else's fingers. Prince Bjorn gently caught the stranger, putting her head on his chest. He felt that the girl in his arms continued to shiver as if from a terrible cold. Erna kept trying to breathe in, lying on her husband's chest. Bjorn's eyes opened wide, and he realized that the girl was suffocating. He continued to stand in one place, gently supporting Erna by the waist and letting her rest in his arms. She slowly opened her eyes, hearing someone's soft voice. Someone was whispering in her ear to breathe. Erna looked up and almost came face to face with the very poisonous mushroom she had been told to beware of. Now she began to tremble for a completely different reason, as tears began to form in her large eyes because of her shame. Bjorn looked at her with tenderness and understanding. He was not going to let her go. The man put his hand lightly on her head and kept whispering to her to breathe calmly. Still, I wonder how long they stood there in an embrace in the middle of a hall of amazed people. Erna did not immediately realize that her action had only attracted more attention and curiosity from others. She couldn't understand it, and when she felt safe for a moment, she slowly steadied her breathing. As long as Bjorn held her tightly and hid her behind his broad back from annoying stares, she was able to regain consciousness. He became her lifeline in this bottomless ocean, although she would realize this only with time. Erna was finally able to move away from her husband a little and get a better look at him. The realization of the tragedy of the situation quickly dawned on her, and she pushed away from her husband and loudly apologized. She realized how rude she had been to him, and he had to stop and take care of her in front of everyone. But Bjorn didn't think her behavior was rude. He thought she was very scared and that she was wearing a strange dress. He wondered why she was wearing it. Soon they heard someone's footsteps approaching, and someone subtly apologized to His Highness. It was Countess Victoria Mayer, and she apologized for her pupil and explained that the girl was very nervous, and that is why she made a mistake. The prince just smiled. He knew perfectly well who Countess Mayer was. This means that the girl has fallen into the hands of the main matchmaker, Riesin, and this explains why she is dressed like this. People gossiped that the countess had deliberately used the prince to make her girlfriend look good. Some argued that it was impossible to guess the time of the prince's arrival and plan such a game. The countess asked the young lady to dance at least one dance, as she was a debutante. Erna angrily refused the woman. Even her patience was at its limit. She had attracted too much attention today. Mayer smiled calmly. The girl had a strong character, although it did not seem so at first glance. The woman folded her fan and touched the girl's chin with it. She respects the young lady's wish not to dance today, but Erna must keep her dignity, because this may be the only chance to preserve the dignity of the Baden family and the people who raised her. The woman asked if the girl understood what she was talking about and what responsibilities she had. The Countess is right. She must pull herself together and behave with dignity. There's only a little more to go. Even though she wants to run away and is a lady of the Baden family, she started counting to calm her breathing. The next moment, she saw him again, the man who had become her support and prevented her from falling in the middle of the hall. Next to him stood another man with glasses, and Erna thought that they really looked like two peas in a pod. The famous princes are twins Bjorn and Leonid. Although they look similar, the aura they radiate is completely different. The famous Prince Leonid, in Erna's opinion, looked very tough and resembled a military man. Prince Bjorn looked very relaxed, as if this ball was a usual walk for him. Now everything was clear to the girl, that man at the train station when she arrived in Schwerin, and then, near the hotel, when she was walking with Lisa. All these times she saw Prince Bjorn. She continued to look at the man, lost in thought. The words poison mushroom were softly forming on her lips. The next moment, Bjorn looked up from his conversation with his brother, and their eyes met. Poor Erna was shivering and blushing with shame again. This evening could not get any worse. The prince caught her looking at him for an indecently long time, and now the two men were looking curiously in her direction. What a shame! Prince Leonid remembered this girl, and he asked his brother if there was really anything between them. Bjorn continued to look at Erna, saying that if His Highness wished it, so be it. Leonid thought that his brother had completely lost his mind. Instead, Bjorn suggested that Leonid ask the girl to dance, because no one would dare to refuse His Highness. The man did not understand why he should do this. It was crazy to him. But Bjorn emphasized that he might be annoyed that the girl he liked was having an affair with his older brother. Leonid reminded him that he had only come here to see if everything was okay, and if it was, he had nothing to do here. When Leonid left, the man looked at the girl again, and if he hadn't known that she was Hardy's daughter and that she had come with Countess Mayer, he could have easily fallen into her trap. It's the trembling in her body, the cold sweat, and the fear in her eyes. She played her role perfectly, and now pretends to be a nice and clean lady in a revealing dress. He didn't know what kind of fool would go to this show, but he would suffer a lot, although it was none of his business. His Highness the King sat silently in the gazebo thinking about something, and finally he said that he needed to marry him. The Queen was sitting next to him and listened attentively to her husband's words. He believed that this was the only way out of their troubling situation. The woman asked him if he knew his son well, because Bjorn did not listen to what they said. She had recently asked her son if there was a girl who troubled his heart. The answer was brutal. The guy asked if his divorce wasn't enough for us. His words gave the Queen goosebumps, and the man looked down sadly. And so it was. The king rubbed his eyes with his hand. He remembered well what his son had given up and what he had eventually come to. He remembered the day when Bjorn burst into his room and announced that he was abdicating and filing for divorce. There was so much coldness in his eyes, he was firm in his decision, and would not accept any refusals or advice. Despite this, he could not think of anything else. It would have been very good if it was not them, but Bjorn himself who wanted to get married again. The Queen could only add that the problem was that their son did not want to do this at all. The man also asked if there was really nothing between their son and the girl. The Queen assured him that if there was, Leonid would have noticed. He didn't care who their son was interested in, whether it was Erna Hardy or someone else, as long as this woman could melt Bjorn's cold heart. The king's only condition was simple. The girl had to be better than Gladys. The Queen assured Philip that his worries were completely in vain. Their son will never get back together with his former fiancée, Princess Gladys. Meanwhile, the clouds around Prince Bjorn's estate grew thicker, and someone's fragile foot crossed the threshold of the room. It was Gladys, hurriedly walking to the very center of the hall, dressed in a blue dress, her snow-white hair falling over her shoulders. Bjorn immediately recognized her arrival, and it seemed that there was no escaping their conversation. Ms. Fitz hurried to warn her husband, but he just brushed it off, because he had learned about his ex's arrival. He asked only for one thing, that they bring him a strong drink as soon as possible. If Gladys wants to see him, he will give her as much time as she needs. The man slowly walked to the reception hall where the girl was waiting for him, and there she was. The girl was sitting in the middle of a green sofa, her hands folded humbly in her lap. Her eyes sparkled with joy and hope as soon as she saw Prince Bjorn. The man just smiled slyly when he saw his ex-wife. He greeted her not coldly, but not cordially either, his tone and expression sarcastic. The man walked into the hall with slow steps. He was very unhappy that the day was starting this way. Still, Bjorn kept his face impassively cold, and he sat down across from the girl. No sooner had he settled down than the girl sang about how they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Gladys begged Bjorn to forgive her for visiting unannounced. The girl thought it would be much better to sit down and talk here than to meet on the street. She was clenching her fingers tightly and trembling. Tears were pouring out of her eyes, and these drops were falling on the girl's hands. Bjorn continued to watch her calmly as she trembled, arms folded. Meanwhile, the girl was in tears and asked him to forgive her again. She recognized the gravity of her guilt, and Bjorn recognized all the reasons for her visit. The man decided to remind the princess that they had long ago clarified their relationship. Bjorn calmly picked up his cup of tea and added that Gladys had given what she wanted to give. And she also got what she needed so badly. There was no point in this conversation. Bjorn could not keep the ironic notes out of his tone and asked the girl if he was wrong about something. He praised Gladys, saying that she was still very beautiful, but she was even more annoying. The tears of this girl could not touch him in any way. He demanded that she get straight to the point and state the reason for her visit, and Bjorn was almost certain that it was an order from King Lars. Especially when all the problems are behind you, how desirable it must be to be ordered by your father to get back together with your ex-husband. Bjorn told her that Gladys was a very kind-hearted daughter, and she immediately agreed to come. The girl tremblingly replied that he was wrong, that she wanted to apologize, because regret was eating her up inside. The man was convinced that Gladys's suffering was in vain, because their side had also benefited from the deal. It's a pity she doesn't realize that. Gladys didn't expect such a cold response and clear calculation, and she tried to stand her ground. In response, Bjorn burst out laughing. His ex is so worried about him that he is ready to break down and die on the spot. It doesn't even sound like a joke. The next second, his laughter stopped and his face took on a cold, dead look. Bjorn was not having fun at all, and their meaningless conversation went on for too long. He threw the cup of tea on the floor with one finger, and it shattered into thousands of small pieces. Tears spilled from Gladys's eyes again, and she saw them reflected in the shards of dishes. Bjorn's gaze did not change at all. His heart was too cold to feel anything. Very soon, the servants burst into the hall, trying to understand what had happened and where the sound of breaking glass was coming from. Bjorn calmly asked the maid to clean the room, his eyes saying that he was not referring to the dishes at all. At that moment, Gladys realized that their conversation was over. In the house of Viscount Hardy, it was not quiet either. After the ball, many things changed. For example, Lady Erna had come to certain conclusions. Licia was very concerned about the girl's health, and Erna assured the maid that she was feeling better today. After the ball, the poor girl fell very ill and spent 3 days in bed. Licia didn't want the girl to be so upset about the clumsy prince, but her words didn't help. The maid asked the lady to wait, and she hurried off to get a large stack of newspapers of various editions. When the girl asked what it was, Licia replied that she had found a great gift for her to distract her. These articles contained a lot of useful information and gossip about the secular community, and you can read all the most interesting things only here. Erna noticed that Prince Bjorn's photo was mostly cut out, most likely the work of the maids. They were scolding the man. As soon as his photo appears on the page, they want to get rid of him because he is a poisonous mushroom. The maid said that she had things to do and left the girl to deal with the newspapers on her own. Meanwhile, Lisa wanted to deal with all the letters and flowers that came to her during her illness. Erna's eyes kept running over the newspaper articles, and there was something that caught her attention. For example, the loud headlines announcing the divorce of the crowns of Prince Bjorn and Princess Gladys. After the divorce, the prince never visited his son. The baby died of fever. The girl clutched the pages of the newspaper with trembling fingers, continuing to look for more and more articles about Bjorn. He never looked at his son and the photo of a smiling prince in a black tuxedo next to him. He ignored his son's funeral, and even the crown prince's inner circle comments on his callousness and heartlessness. As a result of a high-profile scandal, Prince Bjorn transferred the right to succeed to his younger brother, Leonid, effectively losing the throne. What else could you expect from the royal family's poisonous mushroom? The girl was shocked. She said out loud that the prince was a real scoundrel. Lesya brought a huge bouquet of red roses and asked the lady to take a look at this beauty with just one eye. Someone said that at the moment, Count Lehman was the best candidate for Hardy's daughter, raising a full glass to the top. Bjorn took a moment to look over his playing cards. The same Lehman? Is the old man still alive? Peter said that, moreover, the Earl and the Viscount were constantly running into each other and arranging meetings. The man thought that wherever he went, the Hardy name was everywhere. All marriages are the same. If the old man dies, Hardy will just sell his daughter again. The men laughed that the poor woman hadn't had time to try a normal man and would immediately become an old man's wife. Peter added that Hardy reminded him a lot of Princess Gladys. Bjorn was starting to get angry. He was surrounded by idiots. According to the men, although the girls look different, they have the same aura. They are beautiful and graceful like fallow deer. The prince smiled. If these fallow deer get a hold of you, you will sing differently. Someone suggested that we do one last good deed. As long as MIA Hardy is not married, she should be allowed to enjoy the attention of young people. It could be a pleasant memory for them. Peter offered to make a bet. The two men smiled wickedly as they considered their bets. The winner will be the one who chooses the innocent Miss Hardy. This can be a very interesting bet. Moreover, it will be no less profitable for each of them. Meanwhile, Erna admired the beautiful flower in her hands. Lilies of the valley are the most beautiful flowers after all. She had meant to make just one, but didn't realize she had created many flowers. And what to do with them now? The girl wanted to sell these flowers, but will she be able to sell them in Schwerin? With this money, she could help her grandmother, and it is worth thinking about how to realize this idea. There was a loud knock at the door, and Lecia came to visit the girl again. Erna invited her into the room. Lecia came in with a big smile, showing a large gift that she said contained a beautiful dress. Erna didn't understand what the dress was for, and the maid asked if she knew that she was going to visit the exhibition with my lady today. This is a very important annual exhibition at the Academy of Arts, and this time the dress is more modest. The girl was silent. Wasn't this the same academy where Pavlo was studying? In her memories, she saw the face of a young man smiling and reaching out to her. If this is true, she might be able to meet the guy at the exhibition. The academy looked gorgeous and was very crowded, but this time Erna was not nervous like at a ball. Perhaps it was because she wanted to meet Paul? Countess Mayer informed the girl of her hopes that this time everything would go well, unless the young lady had a particular passion for public shaming. Erna assured the teacher that she would do her best to do so. But less than an hour later, the woman's face was already burning with anger, and she called Lady Hardy simply hopeless. The girl's face was very pale, and she again apologized deeply to the countess. The woman reminded her that every mistake the girl makes is a stain on her personal reputation as an educator. She ordered Erna to immediately clean up her act, come back, and stop acting like a hillbilly. The girl held the handkerchief tightly to her mouth, thinking that this time everything would work out well. But the stranger's eyes were on her again, and she began to suffocate. Even though she didn't want to return to this place, she did. Because she is a lady of the Baden family and can get through any difficulties, she put her hat back on in full readiness to go. But her attention was drawn to an unusual man in the back of the garden, standing in the middle of a rose-covered gazebo. He had red hair and a strong build, and his back was to her, but she remembered him. Was it really him? Was she really able to find Paul so easily? She got up from the bench and shouted her husband's name, hoping he would respond, but he was too far away. Erna started screaming louder and headed in his direction. These loud screams were heard by someone who was resting quietly on one of the benches. He heard a thin female voice, and then someone running in his direction. It was the former Crown Prince Bjorn, a man with his eyes fully open, chasing away the remnants of his dream. In front of his face was a girl in an incredibly fluffy blue dress, holding the hem and breathing heavily. Bjorn studied the girl's face, which was quite familiar to him, with interest. Erna Hardy was standing in front of him. She was all out of breath from running fast. The girl sat down on a bench, realizing that she would not be able to catch up with the guy in this dress, even walking in such a heat. She slowly took a breath, letting the wind cool her face. She didn't even realize that someone was looking at her. She thought about the fact that she never found out if the man was Paul, and it depressed her. And yet she came here only to meet him. Meanwhile, the disgruntled Bjorn could not believe that his sleep was ruined because of this provincial woman. The girl slowly opened her eyes, finally resting and catching her breath. Right across from her, the prince was lying quietly and looking at her. He laid his head on his black jacket and folded his arms, imitating a pillow. She could not believe that this was happening to her again, and under such circumstances. Their eyes crossed again, and they met again. Another coincidence? Erna blushed with shock and began to apologize to His Highness. Most of the apologies were made during her quick escape. The only thing she could do was to cover her face with her hands in shame. Bjorn heard the name of the person the girl was calling. A secret meeting in a remote part of the garden. There must have been a lot of people willing to try this innocent deer. The man's attention was drawn to a small, blue embroidered shawl. Bjorn was amused by this incident. He thought it was too trivial a trick to leave his handkerchief for him to return it to her. Meanwhile, the ladies and gentlemen quietly enjoyed the paintings, as well as sculptures by famous artists of different generations. The exhibition was indeed highly respected among visitors, and there were many wealthy aristocrats. Irna stood silently aside with a sad face. She had once again disgraced herself in front of His Highness. She heard new whispers among the young ladies, and this time they were not addressed to her. This attention belonged to the visit of Princess Gladys, who was probably not expected to appear. The girl looked simply gorgeous in her fancy, truly royal dress. Erna couldn't take her eyes off the princess either, who was much more refined and graceful than in the magazines. She had heard rumors that the woman had recently visited the Grand Duke's house. This means that her ex-husband is not so unpleasant to her. She could have become a wonderful queen if not for that tragedy. And why did the prince have an affair with such a beautiful wife? While Erna was being won over by the beauty of the princess, people whispered about the duke's lack of manners. The girl noticed Bjorn entering the middle of the hall. Of course, Gladys noticed him too, and her eyes sparkled with hope. On Bjorn's pocket was a beautiful golden brooch in the shape of a rose, and he looked perfect. No one would even guess that the prince had recently taken a nap in the park. He walked slowly along the red carpet. At the other end of this walkway, in the very back of the hall, stood the royal family, and Gladys was there as well. So he immediately noticed her presence, and it didn't bother him too much. As always, she looked good, although she was wearing an outfit that he thought was too pretentious. Did she really want to see him again? That's what the unlucky princess's eyes said. She was waiting for him. It seems that in their last meeting, they did not fully understand each other. It turns out that Princess Larissa is very serious. The girl wants to return everything to the way it was, and a smile has begun to appear on her face. Bjorn smiled in his own way too, and it would be too little. He's never lost to anyone, and he won't lose to Gladys. The man recalled a conversation with his friends at the gambling table. The bet will start at an exhibition at the Academy of Arts, where they will all be present and the odds are equal. Their argument would end on the day of the rowing competition. Peter thought it was a fair competition. Bjorn thought it would be the height of the summer season. In the end, the one who watches the fireworks in the boat with Miss Erna will win. Peter suggested making chips the subject of their bet. Everyone agreed to this.
Whoever wins will at least be able to afford a house in the city center. Peter asked if Bjorn would play, since he is the king of gambling.
That's how he always wins. The man changed his path and approached young Lady Hardy. Bjorn smiled sweetly at the girl, ignoring everyone present. Erna froze in place. She had not expected the prince to approach her today. Gallery visitors turned their heads and watched the spectacle with open mouths. Bjorn slowly extended his hand to Miss Ernie, showing her a blue handkerchief. He eventually picked it up. The girl noticed it was missing only when she got the handkerchief back and was now at a loss. It had become a habit for her to blush in the presence of the prince, and how could she not notice that she had lost him? At her reaction, the prince only smiled wider, pretending to be a gentleman. Gladys turned pale as she watched in silence as the stranger thanked His Highness for his help. While Erna was in a stupor and pressing her handkerchief to her face to hide her shame, Bjorn continued to speak. He bowed respectfully and asked the lady to allow him to enjoy the paintings with her. The girl almost fainted at the suggestion, and her face resembled a frightened deer caught in a predator's trap. But Bjorn's smile was really a predatory grin. Now he was playing the role of a wolf, aiming for prey. Without waiting for the girl to answer, he first gently caught her fingertips. Then he squeezed me tightly and pulled me along, not giving me any room for reflection. Bjorn's friends saw this and were very angry, shouting at him that he was a scoundrel. He pretended that he was not interested in the bet, but he had them wrapped around his finger. The king and queen also watched peacefully, their ears perked up. The king asked who the lady was. Bjorn's sister, a girl named Louise, happily explained that she was Erna Hardy and shamelessly used her brother to stand out at the ball.